All right, welcome to episode 52 of Seize the Moment podcast. And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Rachel Atcheson. She's the Deputy Strategist for Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. She works on nutrition initiatives, healthy eating resources for individuals, and municipal support for urban agriculture. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited. Carpe diem was something that I was maybe going to get tattooed when I was thinking about tattoos. So being on Seize the Day podcast makes a lot of sense for me. So excited to be here.
We're so excited to have you. And so obviously, as kind of our audience already knows, that we've started doing what's called the How to Live a Good Life series. So we focused on various philosophies of life and various ways that people can actualize meaning or a sense of purpose in their lives. And so today we want to focus with Rachel on the idea or the sort of broad kind of ideology of effective altruism. And so our first question, Rachel, is going to be, what is effective altruism and what are its principles?
So effective altruism is a movement where we are trying to maximize the good that's done in the world. And whether that be by you donating a certain percentage of your salary to make sure to effective charities, making sure your dollar goes the farthest, or whether you're trying to maximize your impact in your career. So whether you are trying to focus on one of three cause areas that the movement has kind of tuned into. One is global poverty, the second is animal welfare, and the third is existential risk. And so for my work, previously in the mayor's office as his Animal Welfare Liaison, and previously working at the Humane League, I focused on farm animal welfare, where we're able to do a lot of good for a large number of animals because of how poorly we treat animals now. So general gist is trying to maximize impact.
Yeah, actually, I read in your bio that as the Animal Welfare Liaison, so you worked on numerous initiatives, which included the banning of wild animals in the circus and a Meatless Monday pilot for Brooklyn Public Schools.
Yeah.
What is that Meatless Monday pilot?
So Meatless Monday is an international movement trying to get people to reduce their meat consumption by going meat-free one day a week. It is a very simple ask, so it's not something that, if you ask someone to go vegan tomorrow, that might be a little daunting, but if you ask them to participate in Meatless Monday, it's one day out of the week. Everyone can, eat a veggie burger once a week. Everyone can try a new recipe once a week. And that's kind of what it's trying to do, trying to teach people how easy it is to eat better for themselves, the planet, and the animals.
That's smart, because you're kind of baby stepping them into maybe accepting that kind of viewpoint. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, it's a foot in the door approach for sure.
And so in terms of effective altruism, it also seems like a bit like, so it seems like the utilitarian philosophy where you're trying to maximize the most good for obviously the most amount of people. And so I would wonder then, how do you guys kind of calculate it, right? How do you figure out how to maximize, I guess, for lack of a better term, happiness, or to maximize kind of goodwill?
So I'll give you an example that the movement has kind of gives as an intro. Let's say we're trying to maximize impact for folks who are blind. So there's a couple different charities out there that can try and reduce the suffering in that sphere. One is the Seeing Eye Dog. I'm going to butcher this, but not the Association of Seeing Eye Dogs, but something like a Seeing Eye Dog support nonprofit. So to train and feed and house a Seeing Eye Dog, it costs roughly $50,000 for the course of that dog's life. Now, if you ask someone who's blind, how does that investment into that Seeing Eye Dog, how does it serve that person? They're going to say, that makes the world of difference to me. Having a Seeing Eye Dog has helped me be able to get out in the community in ways I wasn't able to before I got that Seeing Eye Dog. It makes a very big impact to that one person. Alternatively, halfway around the world, there's a strand of blindness that can actually be cured with a shot. So it costs a couple $100s to get that shot, and then that particular that blindness disappears.
Mhm.
So for the same amount of money as a $50,000 seeing eye dog, I can purchase, a couple hundred shots. Now, when you do that calculation, this is obviously very oversimplifying it, and it's not usually this simple, the calculation. But if you look at that calculation, which one would you do? Would you help one person get that seeing eye dog, or would you try and actually reverse people's blindness, several hundred people's blindness?
Yeah, the shots, of
So,
course. Yeah.
and so that's the, and I say, this was with hesitancy, like that is the oversimplification of maximizing impact. Is if we know that we can do something effectively with less money and have it go farther, and that's largely why the effective altruism movement from the global poverty perspective puts money into communities where the US dollar goes very far. So a lot of the charities such as the Against Malaria Foundation or the schistosomiasis, things that are not sexy, like these are, donating to buy malaria bed nets is not necessarily a sexy charity to donate to, but it can indeed spare a lot of people's lives.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is interested in that, against malaria and then other diseases.
Mm-hmm.
And then since they started their foundation, I believe they've already saved millions of lives.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And they're examples of effective altruists, right? If we had to think of somebody in the public sphere.
Yeah, for sure. And they, I mean, it's pretty easy to be an effective altruist or be put in the category of effective altruism when you have as much money as they do.
Right. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of their charities are not as effective as some of them, but because they have so much wealth, they are able to sprinkle it throughout. But indeed, they definitely align themselves with the effective altruism movement in several of their charitable donations.
So for you, why the interest in animals, or rather, or for example, like the Meatless Monday pilot? Is that what does that serve exactly?
So the interest in animals comes, and it's pretty funny because I'm not actually an animal person.
That is weird.
But from a numbers perspective, so there's three kind of reasons why I look at animals in such a favorable light to spend my time thinking about them. One is the scale. The scale of the problem with how we treat farm animals is tremendous. So right now, there are about 56 billion land animals that we raise and kill each year, just land animals in the world.
Mm.
And those animals are not the animals that you think of that are out in the fields and they're having a good life. No, these are animals that are treated pretty badly. They're animals that are confined in cages. Usually, you can have a farm that has 100,000 birds, no problem, and only in a few sheds. I mean, the way that they are treated is just not not great. So one is the scale, and the scale is very large, 56 billion each year. That is a big problem. But two is the neglectedness. So right now, we don't think about farm animal welfare. As someone who grew up in a city, I never saw a farm animal till I was over 18. It's just not, it was not part of my life. And I did not think that an animal coming to me in the butcher section of the grocery store, I didn't think that was an animal. I just thought, oh, that's meat. That's fine. But indeed, the way that animal gets to the butcher section of a grocery store is really not the prettiest sight. There's that phrase, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, we'd all be vegetarian. There's definitely something to that. So the neglectedness of the problem is one where when we think of animal protection, people think of companion animals. They think of dogs and cats. They might think of wildlife, but they really don't think about the fish that we're eating, the chickens that are laying our eggs, the dairy cow, the veal calf. That's just not in the mainstream animal protection movement, those just aren't like sexy animals to be trying to advocate for. It's just not there. So 2 is the neglectedness, and 3rd is the tractability. So is this a problem that we can solve? And I'd say that this is a pretty significant one. Everyone eats. So it is indeed a problem that people interface with 3 times a day. Yeah. And there are simple ways that we could make farm animals' lives more meaningful. One is by moving away from intense confinement. So right now there's a huge movement going on across the world, moving to cage-free eggs, for instance, moving from battery cages to cage-free. And that has definitely done an enormous amount of good for those hens. So 3rd is the tractability of this movement. I mean, there are things like Meatless Monday. There are things like flexitarianism and vegetarianism and people actively reducing their meat consumption. 2 is the innovation that we have with plant-based meat substitutes, for instance. We've got things like Beyond Meat and Impossible Whoppers now in Burger King. I mean, there's so much innovation. And so there's just a lot there in terms of the tractability. So 1 is the scale of the problem, 2 is the neglectedness, and 3 is the tractability. And that's why I have definitely fallen in love with looking at farm animal welfare as a cause area that I invest my time in.
That's right. Also, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of animals are injected with different hormones, fed diets that they're not normally fed, they're not supposed to have. Like, for example, as opposed to like a corn fed, they should be grass fed. And then also the nutrients in the grass are very important. And there's this idea of you are what you ate, which is basically whatever they ate is what you're taking in when you consume them. Yeah. And if they're getting filled with all this bad stuff, to put it simply, then that's what your body's going to be made up of. And who knows what kind of long-standing consequences that can have. Right.
This is also an interesting time to talk about this because COVID-19 has definitely taken up a lot of the airwaves. And where do global pandemics stems from our relationship with animals. The wet market in Wuhan that Corona came from is not all that different from the factory farms that we have here in the United States. It's close confinement, talk about the opposite of social distancing. It's close confinement and it's the kind of dirty conditions that we have these animals in. Having animals literally shit on top of other animals, that's a norm in our food supply. And so the fact that it came from this one wet market, in a year we could have another pandemic come from, a hog operation down in North Carolina. It's not out of this, out of the realm of possibility.
Right. Wow. And so, I mean, what's really commendable for me in terms of like, obviously you guys, effective altruists, is that a lot of times what people like, what most of us kind of do when it comes to charity work is like, we pretty much sign checks and we give them to, whatever charity is sort of the popular one.
If we even go that far.
Yeah. So that's like the norm for people when it comes to charity work. But what I loved about it is just when I kind of read it on my own, and obviously Alan too, is that what's so cool about effective altruism is the sort of dedication and the times you guys put into like literally considering what's actually the most beneficial charity or what's sort of the most beneficial work that you could be doing. Whereas whereas like for a lot of us, our thinking is just like, well, if we give away a little bit of money or even a little bit of time to something that seems like it's a need, right, then we could kind of go about our daily lives. Mm-hmm. But effective altruism as a philosophy of life is so like, it's so kind of, I guess, radical and so cool because like the people actually embody the philosophy. So charity work is not just something that you guys do every here and there, but it's literally a way of life. And so, Rachel, can you speak to us about that? Like, what's it been like for you to actually be an effective altruist in the sense of like having it as a meaning of life?
Well, so, and I do want to stop and flag the time investment that it takes to be an effective be an effective altruist. I will say it's not necessarily that I myself am digging into the charities, every last dollar and how they spent it, but I'm looking at kind of those charity navigator sort of groups and saying, so for instance, I look at what used to be called effective animal activism is now called animal charity evaluators. So animal charity evaluators, they are the nonprofit that I look to say, who should I donate to? I myself don't have the time to approach a ton of these nonprofits and say, hey, who out of you is doing the most good? I instead put that kind of responsibility onto animal charity evaluators, and I donate a little bit to them as well, just to make sure that they can keep up their operations. And they then rank charities. So they've got they've got a very long list of the charities that they send out questionnaires to. They have interviews with. I mean, they are extremely rigorous. And I think they come out usually around Giving Tuesday back in December. And whenever they do, it's actually it's a total nerd moment and nerd affair when it's like, okay, who this year is going to be the most effective charity? Because indeed, it's not as if the charities that are on the list this year, they might not be on the list next year, because it's not just about are they effective, but it's also about is there a need for that financial investment? Right. Because sometimes there might be a charity that they are constricted because of staff, or they're constricted for X, Y, and Z. And so they might indeed not be the most effective charity to donate to this year, but animal charity evaluators will say, this does not mean that in 12 months they'll be at the exact same spot. So I just wanted to take a moment and flag that it's not necessarily my time that I've invested to making sure that X, Y, or Z charity is most effective. Indeed, I kind of outsource that to a group that is literally, their mission is to tell me who is the most effective charity to donate to. Gotcha. And so, in terms of, I guess, your question though about, what is it like to have, this be kind of my purpose and meaning in life. It's effective altruism has given me a new lens to view life through, and kind of maximizing the amount of good is just now second nature. Just trying to figure out how to do the most good, because we all have a limited amount of time on this planet, limited resources, and there's a lot that needs to be done.
Yeah. What brought you to that level of thinking? Like what inspired you to kind of go down this path?
So a couple things. One is the community, the effective altruism community is beautiful. It's a wonderful community full of nerds. I absolutely adore them. They're just like me, but I love them to death. So one is just the people in it have really gotten me to think critically about where I'm spending my time, how I'm spending my money, etc. So I was a part of starting the Philadelphia Effective Altruism chapter, and then the Washington, D.C. Effective Altruism chapter, and then I just attend the New York City Effective Altruism events that are now, we've got a lot of virtual events going on, etc. But I'd say the level of thinking, it becomes a little second nature when you start adjusting some of your behaviors. So for instance, I was never a big consumer, but effective altruism has really led me to become more of a minimalist, because it makes me a happier person to not be kind of bogged down with a lot of items. And then it also allows me to donate more. So I myself donate 10% of my salary. And this past year, I was lucky enough to donate, I think I was up to like 17% of my salary.
Wow.
Which was, I was really, really excited when I was able to do the calculation at the end of the year, like, oh, how much did I end up donating? Because it kind of changes month to month, but it always stays at least 10%, because I signed a pledge called the Giving What We Can pledge.
That's really awesome. And so
Yeah.
what I even sometimes find in like and I'm sure you guys find this too, and sort of in my clinical work, where as human beings, we all have the need to be sort of special or important in some sense, right? I don't necessarily mean on a grand scale, but I just mean important to other people. And so sometimes kind of people pursue it in a way where they think, where if I spend money on things like, let's say, cars, houses, like kind of lavish luxuries or accessories, then in that sense I can reach a level of status that'll make me happy. Unfortunately, what happens is people kind of understand somewhere down the line, usually, right, with a hedonic treadmill, that
Right.
essentially, yeah. So that it's never enough. And it's like, even if they enjoy it for a quick second, right, eventually they need more and they need to keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
And so what I love about effective altruism is that for you guys, you kind of see the bigger picture, and you see that it's not so much about having money, but it's literally about spending money in a positive way. So it's like, in spending on other people, what you realize you're also giving to yourself in return.
Oh,
Because, right.
100%.
Yeah, because in some way that you guys are super important in your communities. And it's like, not only in the communities of effective altruists, but just in the broader community of, let's say, even the farm animals, right? The people who work in these farms. If, let's say, you're donating to particular charities, those people are really grateful for your work. And so what's so cool about that is like, you guys have kind of found the meaning of life, I guess. If there were an objective meaning of life, I guess, based on science, what we see is that well-being is pretty much being intertwined within your community and being an important member of it.
Yeah.
And so it's literally about how you spend your money. Because I know sometimes people would think, like, why would anybody want to be a minimalist? That doesn't make any sense. Like, if you've earned this money, why wouldn't you want to spend it on luxuries? But for you guys, you're like, but it doesn't make us happy. And if you kind of go down the line, you'll actually see that it's not going to make you happy either. And so was that kind of your experience too when you were sort of starting out as an altruist?
Yeah. So, I mean, one, kind of to take a step back, even a few years prior to discovering effective altruism, about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And I have been suffering with it for the past 10 years. And, there's ups and downs. And thankfully right now I'm at a pretty good place with it. But it can spring up kind of unexpectedly sometimes. But I'd say my pivot to both minimalism to effective altruism has definitely, in some way, it's kind of saved me to kind of put it in a dramatic way like that. It has given me more meaning to my life because it's not just about me. It's about, how can I maximize the amount of good I'm doing for, the billions of farm animals that are out there right now. So I'd say it has given me new perspective and new joy that I'm very, very grateful to have found. And the community is also super helpful because, again, just to be able to talk with people who also think this way and who, will push me of, hey, did you see the charity recommendation turned from this charity to this charity? How can we pivot some of our donations? That also kind of gives me life and gives me more purpose.
Yeah. And
yeah, it's interesting because it's interesting. The bigger the purpose or the bigger the goal, it tends to create these personal boundaries against the things that would get you before in depression. At least in my case, a lot of things that would bother me or that I'd be reactive to, as soon as I had a bigger picture goal that I was working towards, those things didn't seem to bother me as much. It's still there kind of in the background, but having that goal kind of takes that away.
right.
Yeah.
And we had Scott Barry Kaufman on a few weeks ago. So he's a researcher. Yeah. So do you know him?
I know him. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's a friend of mine.
That's cool.
What?
Maybe that's
wow.
the person who told you about it.
It's funny. I'm still trying to remember. I don't think it was Scott, but I should reach out to him.
Oh, that's really cool. So and we were talking about pretty much like, so just for our audience, in case they didn't see the episode, so he's a researcher into well-being and kind of like self-actualization and transcendence and how do you become the best version of yourself. And so we had a conversation with him about depression. So him and I come from, let's say, different perspectives, but they reach similar conclusions. So from his research, what he found is that like these people who, so people who are pretty much more individualistic and just mainly focused on kind of self-actualization in the sense of, let's say I want to become the best version of myself. They were nowhere near as happy as the people who were interested in self-transcendence, right? And sort of going beyond. And so I find that a lot in my clinical work, something very similar, where people tend to think that if I try to become better than everybody else, if I sort of kind of overstep them, then I'll be happy. And I mean, it's kind of a cliche for a reason that it's lonely at the top, right? So people kind of tend to find out that even if they do get to the pinnacle of wherever, right, career, you name it, so they actually are way more lonely and way more unhappy. So it's like this thing that you think is going to sort of ease your suffering and ease your depression actually contributes to it in a significant way in the long run. And so with effective altruism, and kind of obviously for Scott's work and my clinical work, what we see is that it's actually the community and sort of not being important in the sense of being better than, but being important in the sense of being necessary or a necessity in your community. That's the sort of pinnacle of happiness. If you can get to that point, literally that is sort of, there's an inverse and a negative correlation. It's like the happier you are, or rather, the more sort of intertwined you are with your community, kind of like, let's say, the less sad you are. So it's like depressive symptoms tend to be kind of negatively correlated with a person who feels like they're a significant part of their community and that people actually rely on and depend on them.
Right, right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And is that the way you kind of felt? I mean, if you're okay with talking about kind of your depression and your symptoms.
Yeah, no, I'm actually very, very open about talking with my depression. I feel like it is helpful to be open about it. It's helpful to just have an honest conversation because so many people struggle with depression, and I think kind of hiding it just isn't. It doesn't kind of move the conversation forward. So yeah, I'm very, very open to talking about it. And yeah, I'd say my effective altruism has definitely given me more purpose and direction. And I am so grateful to have found it.
Yeah. And it's like, and with depression, a lot of times what happens is people get kind of stuck in this narrow way of thinking where they only, well, I mean, I don't want to say only, but for the majority, they kind of think about sort of how do I improve myself, right? How do I kind of make myself feel better about myself? And unfortunately, sort of the way kind of capitalism is structured, right? It gives you a lot of options, right? You buy this, buy that, achieve this, sort of do that. And the idea is like, they again kind of go back to that treadmill thinking that that's the thing that's going to make them happy, only to find a void in the end. And so it's like when it comes to effective altruism, it's like the sort of like, how can I kind of put this? So it's like the purpose and the energy invested in this thing that in the end is going to kind of like, it doesn't only exceed you, but in the end is going to sort of be there kind of long after you're gone. What kind of existential therapy and psychology kind of a philosophy called rippling, right? So it's like you guys kind of ripple out into the world. So it's not as though like I achieved this thing and then when I pass away, nobody's going to really care, right? But it's like literally this thing that I've achieved hopefully in some way kind of ripples on, whether through my teachings, whether through even the investments that I've made in these different charities. Somebody's going to kind of pick that up and sort of take it elsewhere and move it further along. So it kind of makes us feel like we're part of this global community.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and like for example, like us when we're having this conversation, and the audience when they're watching it, the whole point of why we do the podcast is also to engage in that rippling effect. Maybe we talk about nuanced thinking. Maybe we talk about critical thinking. Maybe we talk about, as right now, effective altruism, right? So this way people can know about this stuff, because a lot of the most essential knowledge is not yet widely accessible, right? And even though it's starting to be like a lot of different people, like you look at Sam Harris, Rogan, or other podcasts, and not even just podcasts. There are other lines of business that are interested in getting out certain ways of thinking. But just being part of that, and then maybe somebody will be inspired to think a new way, have a new perspective, maybe try to understand somebody else in a way that they didn't try before. Maybe they'll take their attention off the little me, and my concerns, right?
Right.
And yeah, and in that sense, like I mean, I don't know if you see it this way, but I would say in a sense, like we're also kind of practicing effective altruism, but maybe, I'm not sure though, because does it necessarily have to do with money?
So you don't necessarily, there are different aspects of the effective altruism movement. So for instance, like I signed the Giving What We Can pledge, and I have pledged to donate 10% of my salary for the rest of my life. And really that just means a few, cutting out the Starbucks drinks, cutting out a lot of the shopping sprees that folks go through, more part of that hedonic treadmill. But so there's the donations, but then there's also kind of the career and what you're doing with the bulk of your time, which brings me to kind of a nonprofit that I would love to point people toward, called 80,000 Hours. 80,000 Hours is a group that's trying to help people, direct them towards effective charities. 80,000 Hours is about the amount of hours that you spend in your career. And so they're looking at how can we place people into positions where, if you look at replaceability, if someone did replace them, they would be replaced with someone who, for instance, is a little bit less effective, or X, Y, or Z. So it doesn't necessarily, when someone says I'm an effective altruist, they might not have signed the Giving What We Can pledge. It is not required to be a card carrying member of the effective altruism movement. But they kind of think in this more utilitarian way, kind of balancing and maximizing the good. So just because you are not necessarily donating to effective charities does not mean that you might not be an effective altruist.
Yeah. And did you ever have like kind of one of those moments where you just felt like, oh my God, like this was great. Like just giving to this particular thing or doing this particular job just literally made me feel like, oh my, like this was just amazing, or I felt so important in that moment.
Oh, I get a high when I click the donate button. I mean, clicking the donate button is definitely one of those weird moments that I love. So yeah, there's definitely some moments within my time in effective altruism that I just get so happy and so excited, for sure.
Yeah, and I notice it kind of goes back, we talk about this in the show, opportunity cost, right? So, for example, a lot of people will spend their time doing things that don't necessarily serve them or their fellow man. And I don't know, just as an example, we were talking about this before, average American watches like 6+ hours of television, right? Something like that. And what else could you be doing?
6+ hours of television a week?
Good one. That's a good question.
It might even be a day.
I think it's a day.
Yeah,
I think it's a day.
Is it a day? Is that during COVID or is that normally?
I think normally.
Yeah. Your screen time is something like 12 hours a day. Not 12, I'm sorry. Like 12 hours like every couple of days, something like that. Like
we need a guy.
Yeah, we need stats. I can't do this off the top of my head. I'm trying my best.
I believe, oh, wow, that's insane. Yeah. Wow, 12. Yeah, I guess. Depending on your job, I can definitely see 12 hours a day. It's just, and I'm.
Well, Alan said 6. I'm saying 12 for phone time.
For screen time.
Yeah, for screen time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm probably wrong. Just by the way, just take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I'm most likely wrong.
So.
Well, no, I'm thinking just how right you probably are.
Yeah, and so the thing is, the amount of time that the average person spends doing that stuff, the question that begs the question, what else could you do with that time, right? And we all have 24 hours in the day, but the choice of how to spend that time and how to allocate certain like resources, mental resources, emotional resources, right. Physical ones, right? It's a very important thing. And I think, for example, being like a minimalist, right? I mean, I think that contributes, or that's related to that kind of thinking. Like, do you really need to spend time, or do you really need to buy all this stuff on Amazon? Or do you need to feel that dopamine rush from scrolling through the Facebook news feed or Instagram or Twitter? Right. Although those are cool things, I'm not saying not to do that, but there's so much time that we could carve out and do something with that could be helpful to other people or to ourselves, even selfishly.
Yeah, I definitely think the world would probably be a better place if we all spent a little bit less time on social media platforms, for sure. The way that even sometimes on social media, people can eat their own, and it's just, yeah. Ooh, God, social media. I use social media. I am definitely an avid user of it, but mostly to try and kind of further the cause. I'll post about my charitable donations, and it's really, really exciting when people message me and say, oh, I hadn't heard of that charity. I'm checking it out. Or, oh, because of you, I've, started donating monthly to, animal equality, for instance, one of the groups that I donate to. And it makes my heart swell for sure. So there's good uses of social media, but there are a ton of downsides to it for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, I kind of wish that like when we're younger, I'm sure most of the time I hope parents do this, but like I think for a lot of us, we get stuck in like that short-term thinking and short-term gratification. Because like obviously it's gratifying to scroll through your Twitter feed or like to watch TV, unquestionably, and it's always going to be so. But I think like and I guess I'm going to go back to this. So a few weeks ago we had Massimo Pigliucci on, and so Massimo's a Stoic philosopher and kind of part of our How to Live a Good Life series. And so the way he kind of presented it was like, look, man, at the end of the day, you're going to have to be the one on your deathbed. And on your deathbed, you're going to have to kind of have a reckoning of your life and ask yourself whether or not I lived a good life. So in kind of his understanding of the world or his philosophy, the belief is that, or rather not the belief, let me say this. The question would be, would you rather be happier knowing that, let's say you pursued a lot of sort of, hedonic pleasure, that kind of you spend most of your life doing a bunch of things that in the moment made you happy? Or would you be happy knowing that you tried your best to be a good person, right? Sort of what does it mean to be fulfilled? What does it mean to be fulfilled? And what does it mean to have lived a good life?
Right.
And so, right. And so the way we kind of sort of, I guess, unfortunately, I don't want to make any assumptions, but the way I at least see it, I might be wrong. But for the most part, our society doesn't really focus too much on what it means to live a good life or how does one actually have a good death. Because the answer to that, as the Stoics would say, is to literally have a good life. Like the only way for you to die well is to have known that you have lived well.
That's so beautiful. And that's actually incredibly timely, as we are in this time of Corona. I hope that it's giving people more of a chance to really dwell and think actively about what does a good life mean for me? Does it mean I'm spending quality time with my family? Does it mean I'm reading more? Does it mean, X, Y, and Z?
Mm-hmm.
I work on plant-based nutrition initiatives now. And it's interesting that you say, about the leading a good quality life. Indeed, we as humans have really never lived longer ever in the past. But we're now at this point of, with the chronic diseases that Americans have, we are living longer, but our quality of life is dramatically reduced as time goes on. Whether we're suffering from type 2 diabetes and have to, get our fingers and toes and feet amputated, whether we're on 20 medications, some to raise your blood pressure, others to lower your blood pressure. There's just a lot that's problematic in our healthcare system, and a lot of that kind of dives into our food supply and our food policies. But indeed, we're not living that quality end of life, and sadly, now the age of when people start being prescribed their diabetes medication, their heart disease medicine, that number is just coming down and down. So I think it's a really good time to think, like, what does leading a quality life mean? And to me, it definitely means eating a healthier diet. I started eating plant-based about 10 years ago. And when I did, my eczema actually went away. I didn't, if you had told me growing up, oh, Rachel, if you just change what you eat, you'd get rid of your eczema, I would have done it like that. Because I would wake up in the middle of the night, scratching my arms, scratching my legs. It was horrible. It was horrible. And I had no idea it had anything to do with the food I was eating. And then I switched the food and haven't had eczema in 10 years. And I tell you, I am so much happier. Talk about quality of life for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I could relate to that on a different level. So I used to be, well, depends where I could start the story, but I guess I'll start here. So I used to be 300 pounds once upon a time.
Wow.
Then took a while, but I did end up getting it down, and through definitely changing my diet, definitely going to the gym too, but diet definitely helped I reduced the amount of sugar intake, carb intake, more fats. I did vegan for like a month. That was a cool experience, but it's not legit going vegan, right? So yeah, but yeah, and what I noticed is, so I had inflammation issues. I had crazy headaches all the time, and same thing. If somebody had told me when I was younger, hey, if you want this inflammation to go away, you want to stop having headaches, you want to feel normal, be able to think clearly, you just have to reduce the amount of sugar intake,
Right.
carbs, and your inflammation will go down. There were other factors as well, and I did other things: sauna, cold shock, drink this, eat that, have this
Right. I
juice,
mean,
that
hey,
juice. Yeah.
we try everything when we are struggling. By all means, I tried probably 20 different creams as I was growing up. So I
Yeah.
feel you. Try anything you can.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, diet is super important. There's this focus. We have a huge focus of preventive medicine in the U.S., but not enough on functional medicine. Right? Like these doctors, like one person I could think of is a pretty famous doctor, Mark Hyman. He wrote this book called The Ultra Mind Solution, and he learned. He used a style of thinking. I don't think he invented this, but there's a style of thinking in medicine called systems thinking. So a lot of doctors are specialized in one area or another. One doctor is a cardiologist, one is a podiatrist, one is this, a gastroenterologist, whatever. Functional medicine or functional doctor, if I'm saying that correctly, it looks at the whole body, looks at the body as a whole, and how everything kind of works together, long story short. So they look at the underlying causes of whatever issue it is that you're having. And a lot of these doctors will point to remedies like diet in order to treat your issues, as opposed to giving you that that blood pressure medication or diabetes medication. Maybe they'll suggest a diet to you that can totally reverse those symptoms. Or both. Right. Yeah, but a lot of times you'll see that. A lot of times they target the root cause of the issue.
In New York, we actually have a clinic, a lifestyle medicine clinic it's run by Dr. Michelle McMacken, and it's called the Plant-Based Lifestyle Medicine Program. And it's at the oldest hospital in the country. And it started just last January, and we expected it to have between 100 and 200 patients. And we actually have about 800 people on the waiting list. And so people are excited to kind of reverse their diseases. Disease reversal is not a super common phrase in the medical world, but indeed, I mean, type 2 diabetes, it's the food. Heart disease, it's the food. There's a lot that can be done just by looking at what we're putting into our body.
Absolutely. And like, so I'm a proponent of Medicare for all, but I also think that it's like pretty much only part of the solution. A lot of what we don't talk about is that like the reason why healthcare in this country is so expensive. It's not, obviously the prices are definitely jacked up. That's unquestionable. But the point is also on top of that, it's like there's not people, and myself included, by the way. So a lot of us aren't sort of health literate. Like we just don't know, outside of like obviously eat your vegetables, eat fruits, etc. We don't really understand or know about the effects that kind of different foods put into or have on our bodies. And I mean, to an extent, it makes sense because they're not like quick, right? You're not going to necessarily eat one donut and then, oh my God, like, you're going to have, right. So it's like, if we're talking,
cumulative.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, so unfortunately what happens is because people, it's just like with smoking a cigarette, when people don't see the effects, what happens is over the long term and in the aggregate, it becomes a bit, maybe not too late, but then that's when all of the issues start. So, I mean, I think that there has to be a point where not only do we see that obviously that we can afford healthy foods, which I hope for the most part is possible for most people, but then on top of that, that we understand why healthy foods are necessary as opposed to the more unhealthy ones.
Right. And there's a lot of relearning that needs to happen, because I think when you think of healthy food, if you think of a healthy plant-based diet can be the cheapest diet out there. It can be the rice, beans, and vegetables. And when you kind of start talking about frozen vegetables, you get even cheaper. So it is that rejiggering what we think it is, because it's not necessarily you eating at Whole Foods. It does not need to be the, all organic products, for instance. It can indeed just be that legume, that whole grain, those fruits, those vegetables. And you've got yourself a good meal that is good for you, good for the planet, and, full circle, good for animals.
Yeah, and there's depending on where you live, this is not everywhere, but some people have a farmer's market near them. Mm-hmm. So if you can't go to places like Whole Foods, go to your local farmer's market and get fresh grown foods. You don't have to worry about, I don't know for a fact, but you don't necessarily have to worry about certain pesticides or certain things being on the foods the way you do with store-bought stuff.
Right. There's Dr. Michael Greger. He wrote a book called How Not to Die. He has the Daily Dozen, and it's an app of, it's a basic list of foods that you should be trying to eat a little bit of every day. And that just reminds me of looking at the Dirty Dozen and seeing, which foods you should try and get organic if you can. But there are definitely a boatload of foods that also it does not matter a ton whether you get them organic or not.
And then the other thing I think is that we also have to get much better at treating depression, because a lot of times when people either consume, let's say, not so healthy food, or they overconsume food, it's because they're using it as a coping mechanism.
Right.
That's right. And then so sometimes sometimes unfortunately what happens is doctors or kind of nutritionists get a little bit kind of hubris, and they kind of become lecturers, because they really don't understand that what's really underlying the consumption, outside of obviously ignorance, which is a lot of the times the case too, but a lot of times it's depression. It's because for kind of people who are struggling with that kind of myopic thinking of, well, my life is sort of bad and I have all of these different problems. Of course they're going to go for short-term gratification. It's like anybody who's suffering is going to go for any sort of semblance of help, right? Whether it's like food or smoking cigarettes or whatever it is. So the idea is, I think it has to go hand in hand when we talk about preventative medicine in terms of what's up? You got something to say?
No, go for it. I'm going to say that.
Okay. So when it comes to preventative medicine, it also has to go hand in hand with kind of better mental health care and information, kind of widespread information. Go ahead.
I got to say, the whole, I agree with you. Yeah, you're kind of like eating to fill a void or something.
Right. Yeah.
So I'll say that when this whole COVID thing started, and of course gyms were closed, but that was like a part of my daily habit, and I had this kind of routine, all that, foods I would eat, all that. So during this whole thing, I've packed on a few pounds actually, but in the beginning it was glorious. I was just like, okay, no, just it's fine. You could get away with eating this, that, and the other. But then it did start to feel like as time went on and I had all this free time, right, I started kind of to do that whole eating to fill a void thing. Even with all this meta cognitive awareness of like what's going on and like knowing like how your mind works and all that, right, still could fall for it. I noticed that about what was going on, right? So I started to kind of pull myself out of it. I'm back to like eating normal and all that. But I do have to say there are certain situations that even if you had a routine, if your routine was disrupted, anything can happen, right?
And I would also even say that context is super important. So sometimes you can even have all of the information and even the best sort of mental health treatment. And if the person is really struggling in their lives, like a pandemic, right, you're going to have circumstances that make it more likely that a person's going to want to overeat or indulge in whatever else that may be kind of in the short term harmful. So, the idea is that there's so many different factors, right? Again, so I love obviously Medicare for all, but I think that it's only like a part of the system that needs to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see what our election brings, to see if we're going to get anywhere closer to a better healthcare system. It will be fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, is Eric going to be running for mayor? I was listening to a different podcast. I was listening to this podcast, History Hyenas. He was just like recently, I guess. Yeah. And I was surprised that he was even on there, because that's I don't know. It's like, it's one that I usually listen to. So I was like, oh, cool. President of Brooklyn. Cool.
Yeah. I think when he got on, I think they were like, yeah, I think you're our first politician or something. So
yeah, I
don't think they have a ton of political guests. And some of the jokes they said, yeah, for sure. Make you understand
yeah.
Some political death. Yes, indeed. He is, has some political aspirations. and might be running for mayor of New York. He is still figuring.
He's got my vote, 100%. 100%. One of the things they said on the podcast, which was hilarious to me, is one of the comedians, Chris DiStefano, he's like, my family, they're all Republicans, but I think you're going to be the first Democrat we're going to vote for. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a good guy. I've enjoyed. I've worked for him for the past 2 years, and he's just got a good eye, very good leadership, and he's willing to ask some of those tough questions. He's really one of the first politicians to stand against the meat industry in such a vocal way, like he has. And yeah, it's been a wild ride with him. It's been fun. So I'm excited to see where life takes him as well.
And I guess one of our final questions before we wrap up, because I am super curious, what does a deputy strategist do? What's your day-to-day like at work?
So I don't have a day-to-day, like a schedule that I go through each day and kind of repeat. That's not my stuff. So I'd say, I mean, we can even look in the last 24 hours. It's a Sunday, so the last 24 hours I am typically off, but this weekend was not as such. So we hosted a press conference around children and some of their symptoms with COVID, and so helping kind of bring in some of the lifestyle medicine folks into that conversation. But I'd say this week was definitely looking at how we can expand our Bellevue programs. So our Bellevue program, has that 800 person waiting list. And if we look at sort of the communities that are most hard hit with Corona, it is indeed communities of color. Communities of color are most hard hit with diabetes, heart disease, et cetera. And so trying to bring lifestyle medicine into that conversation is one that is just so needed. And then also, I mean, looking at sort of from outside of the health realm, looking at what sort of animal agriculture has done to our environment, the pollution and the carbon emissions that come from it. So we've looked at that. I've definitely tried to bring that lens because that is some of my previous work. So a deputy strategist really does whatever Eric needs to get done. But a lot of it focuses on his passion area, which is plant-based nutrition, and kind of moving that agenda forward, that lifestyle medicine conversation forward.
Yeah, awesome. And so to wrap up, so I guess my final question would be in terms of a philosophy of life. Right? Let's say somebody who's never heard of effective altruism kind of came up to you and they were looking and sort of searching through different philosophies and wondering how they ought to live. How would you advocate for it? What would you tell them the benefits would be?
Yeah. It really depends on kind of their own backstory. I love kind of approaching each person differently. So, just like how if an environmentalist comes to me and says, hey, what is this vegetarianism thing that you talk about? I probably would not talk about the animal aspect or the health aspect. I would approach them with the environmental. So, it really depends on what their backstory has been. If they have depression, I would definitely speak about that as that might be common ground for us. I've also, I've been sober for 10 years. So, it kind of really depends on what that person's previous history has been.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say look into maximizing your impact. Do you want to have a legacy of one of greatest impacts? Because we all have legacies and we all have impacts. But whether or not it is kind of your fullest potential is how effective altruism might be able to guide you. So I'd probably start with that and go from there.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, Alan, final questions before we go.
Oh yeah, if we wanted to follow you online, where could we follow you?
So Twitter, R_Atcheson, and Instagram, XVXRachel. So probably in the show notes. So, yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on, Rachel. This was such an enlightening podcast.
Yeah. I'm so happy we can make it work. Much love.
Absolutely. Bye.
All right. Wow. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was such a good show, man.
Yep.
Wow.
And if you guys want to follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like, subscribe,
hit the bell on YouTube. Yeah. And you can also find us at the O4L Online Network at O4LOnlineNetwork.com. And you can find us on top on the under the STM podcast section. And so, and of course, kind of one plug before we go. So are you stressed that you can't leave the house are you stressed that you can't leave the house to keep up with the routine, fighting with chronic conditions such as diabetes and hypertension? Wow, isn't that like so apt now? So having trouble coming up with healthy ways to feed the family, or simply need the support system to make your goals a reality. Vera and Verified Nutrition offers a free 15-minute consultation on her website at VERAFIEDNUTRITION.com, at verifiednutrition.com. And you can read more about her individual journey, her experiences, send her a message, check out her blog page and the services she offers, and make your choice to get verified.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Look forward to the next episode. See you guys then.